besties are back.
After we had our 230 discussion, a lot of people started talking about it. Have you come to some conclusion as to an exit ramp for 230 or a way to maintain it without, throwing the baby with the bathwater?
Yeah. Well, okay. Just can I make one concluding thought on this last topic? So the reason why innovations happen so fast on the internet is because of, one word, permissionless. Right? Permissionless innovation. Nobody who has an idea for a startup needs to go get permission from someone in the government, repeatedly. That's really what makes a difference. Mark Zuckerberg, as a, sophomore in college, can just build his project. Larry and Sergey, as PhD students, can just build their project, ship it, start, getting users, and they don't have to get the permission of a regulator, whose incentive, by the way, is just typically not to get fired by approving something that might rebound on them in some, bad way.
And to keep their job,
keep their job. I mean, imagine if, imagine, just to take like a random example, when Elon launched Starman, remember when he put he launched the Tesla into space and there's like a astronaut in there and it was like this kind of really cool moment. I assume he just did it. I assume he didn't get permission from anybody to do it. But could a moment like that have really happened if he did have to get permission? No way. It'd be like making its way up through the chain. No one would know what to think of it. No one would know whether they could be the one to approve it. And then what if something goes wrong? What if the Tesla comes back down to Earth and, turns into a meteor or whatever? Those are the scenarios that be running through their heads. Nobody would have allowed it, right? And so when you just let entrepreneurs do things, like good things happen, right? And that's why we've had so much progress on the internet. And in so many of these other areas, we've had much less progress because, what a system like that selects for is your ability to go lobby regulators as opposed to just building your project and shipping it.
I think that one of the things that maybe happens is that, we're all expecting, or maybe some of us, I have definitely, some version of a New Deal and some grand bargain. And I wonder maybe whether the New Deal and our sort of like our version of FDR over the next, 10 years is the person that actually says, guys, we're going to have a wholesale rewrite of the regulatory infrastructure to account for technology. Just period. We're going to start someplace reasonable and small, and we're going to make common sense reforms, just observing the times as they exist today, right? And we're going to go and systematically try to make these industries a little bit more resilient, a little bit more entrepreneurial, a little bit less corrupted by regulatory capture and lobbyists and laws that just don't make sense 100 years later.
It'd be great if we could do that. The reason we can't is because how do you reform the law without the lobbyists getting their fingers in it, right? And the problem is there's no lobbyist for the company that doesn't exist yet, right? For the founder, for the entrepreneur who's got an idea in their head, but they haven't built their company yet. There's nobody representing that person in Washington, right? Mm-hmm. And what happens is you get new regulations in Washington. Some agency gets created. They reach out and touch an industry. But now every player that's affected has to create their own lobbying, organization.
Not true. And David, what do you think about this? What if the advocate for the entrepreneur or the uncreated company and uncreated product is really the same as just individual civil liberties and rights? How are they really that different? Because really what it's doing is saying, the entrenched organizational infrastructure that runs my life gets deconstructed and then power gets pushed down to me, the individual. That's tantamount to the same thing, I think.
Well, we have seen some pushback. Well, there is some silver lining here. If you look right now, the citizens of California, obviously people have been fleeing, and we've been talking about California and the one-party system here causing so many problems. But we did have Prop 22 pass. And we now have 900,000 people have signed to recall Governor Newsom. And these seem to be some pushback against this sort of nanny state where people can't make decisions. And then additionally, today, the SEC announced that they will allow gig working companies to give stock to employees as part of their compensation, up to 15% of their compensation. In fact, Hester, how do you pronounce her last name? It's not Pierce.
You can't pronounce the word Pierce?
Purse. No, it's spelled Pierce, but Hester Peirce is worth following on the Twitter, HesterPeirce. Hester Peirce, I had her on my podcast this week in Startups, and they're really getting aggressive in changing the accreditation law. So anybody's going to be able to be an accredited investor. You just become sophisticated through a testing mechanism. And now they want to let gig workers get equity compensation.
But by the way, sorry, here's a perfect example of a regulatory body and infrastructure that actually has changed with the times. I think the SEC, in fact, I think we talked about this a little bit the last time. I actually think one of the best Trump appointees has been Jay Clayton. And I actually think Jay Clayton has done an incredibly good job. And a lot of what he's done is just deconstruct this kind of nanny state and say people can become educated and make good decisions for themselves. And because it's in an area that's relatively benign, i.e. investing, people kind of just let it happen without a lot of pushback, and everybody kind of generally supports it. Democrats support it, Republicans support it, and the outcomes are really good. To your point, Jason, which is in a world of zero rates, how do you expect any just, average, ordinary, middle American who just works a decent job to save for their retirement to actually make enough money? Well, they're going to have to get educated, and they're going to have to find a way of putting their money to work in assets that have a better return, which literally was illegal up until very recently.
Yeah,
and you were systematically letting the rich stay rich.
And you were blocking the poor from having an opportunity to advance. Like, what if Apple Store employees could get their paycheck and say, I want to take my paycheck 70% cash, 30%, restricted stock units at this discount. Like, we could let Apple Store employees make, $1 million after 5 or 10 years of working there 10, 20 years from now and have generational wealth change. David Sachs, you had comment.
Well, I was just going to ask Chamath, do you think this type of deregulation is going to happen in the Biden administration?
Yes.
Because what you're discussing is like a very, really kind of classical Republican or Reaganite idea, right?
I agree. And I think what's going to happen is I think you're going to continue to see deregulation in areas that are benign and non-controversial. So I think the SEC, the FCC, I think all of these places you'll see movement. I think you'll probably actually see a lot more choice and deregulation effectively in Medicare and CMMI. I think those places will move first. And then I think it'll be up to some leader politician to then really rally the troops on some higher order bits. And one of the biggest higher order bits would be sort of around the broader healthcare infrastructure, Social Security,
education.
But I do think education is probably the biggest one. That's like it's just too sacrosanct for the Democrats. You cannot get elected without the teachers. And so unless there is a startup that completely disrupts teacher pay and teacher compensation, then the public school teachers unions will continue to dominate a lot of the federal and state policy, for the worse, unfortunately.
Freeberg, if you had one regulation or series of regulations or regulatory body you would most like to see change for the good of humanity and, Americans and the rest of the humans on the planet, what would it be?
Probably health. It's probably the drug process, the drug development process. There was a gene editing program that ran and someone died. What year was this? 97, 99? And they basically halted all gene editing programs for 13 years. You know how many people died during that time? It's a crazy fact. Where the one death is too many rule, basically doesn't take into account the kind of broader implications on the downside. So I think that one's probably pretty important. But there's a good interview if you want to hear some interesting thoughts. And I'm again not trying to be an advocate for any political point of view. But Charles Koch goes on Tim Ferriss. Have you guys heard this podcast interview?
I've listened to it, yeah.
Yeah, and he highlights a couple of really good examples about this regulatory capture problem. Like, if you're poor and you want to become a hairdresser and, start a salon or go work in a salon and make money cutting hair, the cost and the burden for you to go get the necessary approvals from the cosmetician association is too burdensome for, the average person who's poor and needs to become a hairdresser. And it's just insane that you can't just go be a hairdresser.
The government needs to ensure that people don't get bad haircuts.
No, it's worse. It's worse.
Yeah.
You don't need a license to be the engineer that writes the machine learning code that either drives a car autonomously or that, helps propel disinformation in a social network. But you do need to have a license to give someone a buzz cut.
Oh, that's a bingo statement right there.
Yeah. I mean, in fairness, I am checking out Sachs's new haircut here, and I'm kind of thinking...
So there should be more regulation?
I was practicing without a license.
You were. I mean,
yeah.
Did you do that yourself?
We can't see the result of this. You may want to think this went through.
I mean, Sachs, you're so white and pale. You're blending into the background shade. It's impossible to see where your skin ends, your hair starts, and the shade begins.